Welcome to another edition of Silicon Bytes. This one is entitled This Will Break Russia, and we go into much more detail about the rumoured summer offensive and the impact it may have not only on the war, but on Putin's regime itself. Before we get into this, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and of course through watching, liking, subscribing, and sharing around the videos. Your support, your interaction with the channel helps massively and helps us to keep producing this content day in, day out to fight Russian aggression and Russian imperialism. In this Silicon Bytes episode, we'll look at the latest comments of Russian patriots calling out their own army not for its crimes, but for its ineffectiveness and inability to mount breakthrough offensives. There are rumours of North Korean troops being drafted to support Putin's last throw of the dice in a major summer offensive. We look at Russia's brutal tactics and Ukraine's defence, and finally ask whether economic and manpower strains in Russia mean that this is the last year in which Putin can maintain full combat operations in Ukraine, and how could an increase in Western support for Ukraine further pile pressure on Putin's stretched resources? Let's unpack Putin's last-ditch gambit for a maximalist victory in Ukraine. Russian nationalist critics are turning on their own military. North Korean troops will likely appear on Russia's borders and perhaps in Ukraine itself. The massive human cost and meat wave tactics are unsustainable. Ukraine's fortifications are so far holding firm, and they are getting stronger. The economic and recruitment collapse threatening Russian military sustainability will really kick in later this year, making the ability of Russia to sustain full combat operations through past 2026 highly questionable. Stay tuned. This may be the war's most decisive turning point. Even within Russia, dissatisfaction is rising. Former FSB commander Igor Girkin recently blasted battlefield failures in a Telegram post. We see no strategy, only brute force. Generals afraid to ask harder questions. This is quoted in 2025 from Igor Girkin. Similarly, the nationalist author Maxim Kalashnikov sounded the alarm. This is attrition without objective, men dying for mud, not purpose. This was reported in Russian News, July 2025. These voices signal a widening divide. Patriots who want victory, not vanity missions for political purposes, and pointless taking of ruined villages and pockmarked fields for no strategic gains. Their critiques pierce the veil of Kremlin propaganda. This will break Russia as Putin plans a summer offensive to change the dynamic of the war, but still seeks maximalist objectives with deployment of insufficient resources to meet those objectives. On the private Telegram channel Razvedchik, the Scout, the following text appeared. The General Staff has laid on Putin's desk a plan for an offensive in the second half of the summer, sources said. The military personnel of the operation are proposed to be freed up from border guard duties, with North Korean soldiers being prepared to replace them. This is where the rumoured 30,000 North Korean combat troops come in. But if we think seriously about what this means, it is truly mind-blowing. It is insane even. Firstly, how many Russian border guards will 30,000 troops release for combat duties, and what is the level of military training of these border forces? If this only releases 30 to 60,000 personnel, is that enough to make any kind of a difference if they are untrained, unfit, and going to be used in the same brutal meat wave attacks? The idea of putting your entire border security in the hands of another country is beyond insane, especially if that country is one of the most brutal dictatorships on earth, North Korea. The language barrier is likely to be a recipe for absolute chaos as well. But also imagine if Russia is invaded, will they really put up a fierce resistance to defend another's country? What if Russia and China fall out? North Korean troops may simply be inclined to let China through without a fight. This is not just a strategic surrender of sovereignty, but a surrender of the entire security of Russia to a potentially hostile power. Ironic when the implausible excuse for the war in Ukraine was to protect Russia against fictitious threats from NATO, threats to its borders, and now Putin is surrendering the whole country and its critical security. The chief of the general staff personally reported to the president on the readiness for a large-scale phase of the operation in the coming months, with the goal of pushing beyond the new regions, so-called. That would be Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, and possibly also including Sumy and Kharkiv now. In the main scenario, as insiders have learnt, a breakthrough is planned deep into Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipropetrovsk regions to create a buffer zone by the end of the summer. The document also contains plans to reach Odessa. The General Staff is proposing to the President to expand the zone of control as much as possible before the autumn rains begin, when Rasputitsa, the mud season, will hinder the use of equipment and force, forcing both sides into positional defense. According to the source, Russia should have the resources for such an operation. This is extremely doubtful. The response of Maxim Kalashnikov is insightful and devastating. I consider this to be almost fantastical. Even if 30,000 North Koreans replace our border guards, a large-scale offensive, including a Dnipro River crossing, won't be possible. The issue of paralyzing the Ukrainian armed forces' rear with an air campaign remains unresolved. Ukraine's command and supply lines have not been destroyed, says Kalashnikov. As a result, the problem of the enemy's mass use of drone swarms remains unresolved too. These create a death zone dozens of kilometers from the front line. In other words, the enemy will inflict monstrous losses on our equipment and infantry, turning our attempts to advance into a repeat of Passchendaele or the Nivelle offensive in World War I, while themselves holding their lines with relatively stretched forces. Our quantitative superiority, but not qualitative, especially in drone warfare, does not solve this problem. We still haven't restored order in our own air force, and thus we are unable to isolate local combat zones. So what assault on Odessa are we thinking about? At best, just a slow and costly pushing out of Ukrainian forces from a few villages. Otherwise, the bloated, nepotism-ridden, corrupt and sluggish system simply does not know how to wage war. He continues, one thing is certain, summer is the last chance, and after that, the ferocity of the crisis in Russia's economy will put an end to the country's ability to wage war. Both Ukraine and Russia are exhausting themselves. No cosmetic fixes can compensate for the bundle of glaring missed opportunities and total disregard for modern war experience that's been accumulating since 2014 and especially since 2022. It is too late to drink borjomi, that is, mineral water, when your kidneys have already failed. So we'll have to do what Trump wants in the end. This is truly scathing from Maxim Kalashnikov. But what does Trump want? This is not exactly clear, as he has been more lenient on the Russian dictator up until now. But Trump may finally have realized that Putin has no intention of stopping the war and is indeed ramping up his aggression, both in scale, intensity, and in the indiscriminate targeting of civilians. The pressure on Trump is building within his own party to deal with this rather than ignore it and appease Putin. Trump may also be starting to understand that Putin is not sincere and is openly mocking both the US administration and him personally. And many top Russian patriots, not liberals but hardliners, are publicly tearing into Putin's war. Here's another quote from Igor Gerkin Strelkov, former FSB member and Donetsk commander, now in prison for extremism against the Russian army. He recently blasted Russia's military strategy on Telegram. Without at least a partial mobilization in the Russian Federation, it will be impossible to launch a deep strategic offensive against the so-called Ukraine. He wrote this on Telegram in April 2023, and it's quoted in Wikipedia. It is as true now as it was then. Meanwhile, Maxim Kalashnikov, co-founder of the Club of Angry Patriots, along with Girkin, decried the senselessness of Russian tactics. This is attrition without objective, men dying for mud, not purpose. He wrote that in July of this year. To them, Putin's war is a vanity project, not a strategy. Organs of violence need clarity. These patriots see millions of dead, not for land, but for ego, for politics. And in that, they're not entirely wrong. Reports suggest a dramatic escalation. North Korean soldiers guarding Russia's western borders, freeing Russian troops to fight in Ukraine. The mutual defense pact between the countries reinforces this shift. The publication Understanding War noted Pyongyang is likely leveraging this for combat experience under the mutual defense pretext. This was quoted in the Institute for the Study of War in October 2024. But it's risky diplomacy and a dangerous escalation, especially to bring new waves of North Korean troops to guard Russia's borders. Putin may be gambling everything on foreign muscle, an ominous sign of absolute desperation. So far, it's thought that 10,000 soldiers, possibly up to 14,000, accompanied by senior staff, including 3 generals, have travelled from North Korea and will soon be seen in combat operations. Well, this was in 2024 when these troops were brought in to try and clear the Kursk region after Ukraine's offensive there. And now that number is set to increase to 30,000, allegedly. Quoted in Al Jazeera, November 2024, Daily NK cites a defector, Chung. Their overseas missions are referred to as deployments. Soldiers themselves aren't officially informed until right before they depart. In a CSIS analysis for $2,000 per soldier, Russia is running an assembly line operation to deploy North Korean troops. And on the battlefield, well, it's grim. Le Monde notes North Korean troops have deployed despite sustaining heavy casualties due to lack of advanced equipment. The Guardian confirmed that hospital treatment in Kursk for North Korean soldiers who were wounded has been taking place on a large scale. The summer offensive is the last throw of the dice before the collapse of Putin's war and possibly his regime as well. Analysts warn this may be Putin's Hail Mary. The Financial Times reports heavy manpower losses, Russia's deadliest summer offensive yet. Ukrainian defences in Sumy, Kharkiv and Kupiansk have held fast. Ukraine has lined trenches, dug deep anti-tank obstacles, built urban strongholds resistant to massed infantry. This was reported in Russia in July 2025. WP reports that meat-wave attacks, waves of poorly equipped infantry thrown at prepared Ukrainian trenches, still form the core of Russian tactics. The Kiev Independent remarks Russia's summer offensive becomes its costliest campaign during Ukraine's invasion. This was analysis by The Economist via the Kiev Independent, and actually it shows that the daily, the weekly count of Russian killed and wounded has been steadily rising throughout the war, but is now accelerating in quite an alarming fashion. Well, at least it must be alarming for the Russian side. This is attrition without hope. Fail again, and the regime may unravel from within. Fortifications and Ukrainian defense. Ukraine, of course, isn't passive. The front line is now a fortress. Economist interactive graphics show trench lines, anti-tank ditches, urban strongpoints designed to stop waves of Russian army infantry. From Russia, Ukraine has lined trenches, dug deep anti-tank obstacles, built urban strongholds resistant to massed infantry, and the Institute for the Study of War report adds Russian offensive campaign has stalled. Heavy defensive measures are paying off. CNN paints the same kind of picture. Ukraine halts advance in Sumy, lines redeployed, defenses held. In short, Ukraine's back is against the wall, but superior preparation is holding the Russians at bay. And then there is the economic and recruitment collapse to consider. Fortifications are not the only line of defense if Russia can't sustain the war. Economist and Kiev Independent report skyrocketing recruitment costs, bonuses, contract wages, and recruitment fees far beyond what the Russian state can sustain for several years. North Korean troops need to be paid, and millions of mobilized men require logistics, gear, and food. It is an economic bloodbath. WP flagged growing inflation and budget strain as funds diverted from civilians to the war in Russia. If funding collapses, so too does conscription, and with it, Putin's war machine. Let's be crystal clear. This is a regime pushed to desperate extremes, buying foreign soldiers, losing millions, collapsing its economy. Ukrainian fortitude meets Russian hubris. The next few months may determine Putin's fate. Ukraine defends not just territory, but a world where sovereignty and humanity and rule of law matter. The alternative? Death by 1,000 desperate criminals, 100,000, a million, however many Russia can chuck into the front lines. Add to this renewed US and European support and the compounding effects of economic pressure, and this could tip the scales in Ukraine's favour. Before we close this episode, one more crucial shift is underway, and it just might break the Kremlin's back. After months of delay and domestic infighting, US military support is back on the table, as reported by The Guardian. Donald Trump is poised to send weapons under a Biden-style drawdown system, say sources familiar with the talks. The White House appears willing to escalate deliveries before the autumn campaign season. This isn't just symbolic, it means long-range munitions, drone swarms, mine-clearing equipment and Patriot systems can start flowing again, stopping Russian advances when combined with Ukraine's domestic innovation and determination. In parallel, European nations are ramping up their commitments. Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland are not only pushing out hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, but also training more Ukrainian recruits and delivering NATO standard equipment at scale. Finally, NATO's Washington summit earlier this month underscored this strategic pivot. As Politico put it, NATO allies have pledged to maintain defense spending above 2% of GDP, pushing it to 3.5% in the medium term and overall 5% if you include some indirect costs that will still contribute to resilience and security, with a new long-term fund established for Ukrainian defense and reconstruction. This was reported in Politico Europe, July 8th, 2025. But perhaps most devastating to Putin's long-term warfighting ability, sanctions are being tightened, not loosened. A June 2025 Economics Observatory report found Russia's productive capacity is shrinking. Sanctions are steadily degrading its access to semiconductors, precision optics, ball bearings, and machine tools, all critical for high-end weaponry production. This is where Western cohesion becomes strategic warfare. Every artillery shell delivered to Ukraine is matched by a missing circuit board in a Russian missile. Every HIMARS truck arrives while Russia struggles to replace tires, turbines, or diesel injectors blocked by export controls. We must finally close off all the loopholes. And financial pressure, as reported by The Telegraph. The Russian economy is more dependent on war spending than ever. With oil revenues hit and the ruble under pressure, the state is printing money to pay bonuses for frontline conscripts. Put plainly, Russia is bleeding cash, soldiers, and supplies. If the Western military-industrial complex ramp-up continues, and if sanctions tighten the noose, then full-spectrum combat operations may no longer be sustainable for Russia by mid-2026. That timeline matters because Putin's war is not waged in decades, it's fought in quarters, and it's lost in fiscal years. This summer offensive could mark the ultimate limits of hubris and overreach of Putin and be his undoing, not just of his pointless and evil war, but of the vicious, parasitic regime he has run since 2000 as well.